Hey everyone, Rob B here with Rob D, and you are listening to the Property Podcast. Now, serviced accommodation, it's been the hot strategy in property circles over the last couple of years. Lots of people interested in it, and even some traditional buy-to-let landlords have been pivoting over there because it does come with some potential rewards. But serviced accommodation during the COVID crisis, surely it's been a disaster. How are investors with that strategy surviving? Well, this week, we've got a serviced accommodation expert on the podcast with us who will be revealing all.
Welcome to the Property Podcast, where every Thursday morning, investors come to be informed and inspired. This week, we've got a very special guest on the podcast, and he's going to be telling us what the last few months have been like for him operating in probably the hardest hit of all property sectors, that's serviced accommodation. So stay tuned for that one and stick around to the end for Hub Extra, where we've got a resource to help you develop your skills beyond property.
So for our news story this week, we're using Home Track, a report that we reference quite regularly because it comes out quite regularly every month. But the reason we're so fascinated with it is not just that it gives you loads of information and it's quite an interesting report in general, but it also breaks it down city by city. And we know so many of you listeners love to find out which cities are really performing well, which cities are not doing so well, and are Rob and Rob right with their predictions, or are they looking silly? Well, at the moment, Nottingham leads the way with growth of 4.3% this year, and Manchester not far behind with 3.9% growth year on year, which when you consider everything that's happened over the last year is pretty good. But Rob, what's really interesting is the data from the last month or two, because that's when things have been slightly even more challenging than normal, you could say, for the property market.
Yeah, just a bit. But the incredible thing is that they're reporting that house price growth is not only up year on year, so it's up 2.4% on last year, but that's actually accelerated over the last month, which is completely not what you would expect, given the fairly well-publicised challenges to the economy in general. Now, HomeTrack take their data from Zoopla, and Zoopla put their index together by combining a lot of different data points. So they look at sales, they also look at listings data, and they look at mortgage valuation. So they're taking data points from lots of different parts of the transaction process. And you might say it's not as reliable as looking at actual just sold price data, which may turn out to be true. But that sold price data takes a few months to come through. So if they've got their index right in the way that they balance out all their data, we're getting a sneak peek of what's going to happen. And it's really interesting to see how resilient the market currently is. Now, they're not saying that there aren't going to be challenges for the property market. They explicitly say that there are challenges ahead. But they say that those challenges are not going to be seen in quarter three. They still think that that annual growth rate is going to be maintained for the third quarter of 2020. And then we might start seeing downward pressure towards the end of the year or into the start of 2021. Why is that? Two reasons. One is that any pent-up demand from lockdown will have been worked through by then. And the other being, as we talked about, the furlough scheme coming to an end. So you'll probably see an increase in unemployment at that point. So listeners to the podcast will not be astonished by this, Rob, because it is what we said a few weeks ago.
It is, although one bit of data doesn't quite confirm all our predictions yet, and we made a few biggies. So if you haven't been listening to our episodes recently, please do, because we made some big, bold calls. Before we kick off with the main event and speak to our expert this week, I just want to draw your attention to YouTube. The reason I mention YouTube is we kicked off last year doing it properly. And we're already at 14,000 subscribers, which is amazing. Thank you so much for supporting that channel as well. But what's really amazing is how it seems to be snowballing. So back in March, we added 500 subscribers, a decent amount. Now, as we record this at the end of June, we're adding 500 subscribers a week. So clearly we're doing something right, and thank you. We'll do more of what we're doing as well. So if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel yet, go and check it out, because we're going to ramp up the content later this year. We're already putting out a brand new video every couple of weeks, and you can also access the podcasts there as well. But we're going to be upping what we do on the channel, especially as we come out of lockdown and we can do more recordings. So if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, and to make sure you don't miss anything, there's a notification bell you can hit, and it'll tell you every time we put out a new video. So if you've got the YouTube app on your phone, check it out now. Just search for Property Hub UK.
I think it's fair to say that 2020 hasn't turned out the way any of us expected it to. It's hard to think of any aspect of our lives or of the economy that hasn't been affected by the coronavirus pandemic. The property market, of course, has been severely affected. If you've been trying to buy, sell, refurb or let a property over the last few months, you will have had major challenges doing so. But there's a sector of the overall property market that has been affected more than any, and that is serviced accommodation. In other words, renting out properties for the short term, anything from a couple of nights to a few months. It's hard to imagine a situation that could be any worse for this sector than a complete stop in all business and leisure travel. And there were reports of the long-term lettings market being flooded with people putting their short-term accommodation back onto the regular market because they couldn't see any hope of letting it out on a short-term basis in the near future. Well, today we're getting a first-person account of what it's been like operating in the short-term accommodation market during the pandemic. We're speaking to long-term friend of the Property Hub, Chris Ryder. Chris has been investing in buy-to-let over a number of years. Over time, he's adapted his portfolio to focus largely on the serviced accommodation sector. And I can't think of anyone better to tell us what's really been going on and how he's been responding to it.
Chris, thanks for joining us. So the first question, are you exclusively investing in serviced accommodation properties now, or do you still hold some traditional buy-to-let properties? And are you seeing benefits after changing strategies?
So what we've done over the years is seen the opportunities that serviced accommodation can provide and moved most of our buy-to-let, so all but two of our buy-to-lets we've moved and now rent them on a short-term basis for holiday lets. And we see the revenue being much better. So we would expect our revenue to be at least twice, if not three times, the revenue that we would get from renting that property on an AST. There is more work to run it on a service accommodation. You can get software that can help you with that, but it can't do everything. So that's what we've done. So that's why we've moved most of our portfolio into service accommodation.
So at the start of the year, how are you feeling about the industry that you're in?
At the start of 2020, January 2020, we were really encouraged. We were halfway through, so we bought a property post-auction that needed an awful lot of work. So that's something we love doing, love taking a property that's in really, really poor condition and refurbishing it. So the property we bought post-auction had been empty for 4 years, had a serious damp issue. So we were refurbishing that with a view to turn it into service accommodation. That was our plan A. And that's in actual fact what we've done. So in January, we were still very confident about the market, despite sort of Brexit happening. And I think things have started to settle down a little bit there and a little bit more confidence was returning. We were very confident at the start of the year.
And can you remember when it must have been probably like around February that most people started hearing about COVID-19 for the first time? Do you remember the first moment when you thought, oh, this might be something that affects our business here?
Yeah, so that is a concern. So we've got three core markets. So we've got the tourist sort of guest market, leisure activity market. We've got the corporate professional market, and we've got contractors. What actually happened when we could see what was happening, our bookings started to get cancelled from a leisure perspective. So that was quite an impact. And in fact, to give some figures on that, when I look at Q2 2019 and Q2 2020, and I'm not quite at the end of it yet, we're down a third on revenue year on year for Q2. So what had happened was when we saw that what was happening with the crisis, and of course because people aren't moving around, so all our leisure bookings cancelled. What we sort of did was we concentrated more on key workers. What we were able to do there is we offered our accommodation to NHS workers at really reduced rents. We were on a list with the Cabinet Office to help with that. And because of nurses, doctors moving around the country, needing short-term accommodation or needing to self-isolate, we offered that to the government. We also concentrated on key workers. So where we operate in Kent, there's a big wind farm, an offshore wind farm. So though the people who maintain the wind farm, they were still working through the crisis. So we were able to build better relations with those and get bookings from key workers. And then what happened as part of COVID is the people working, so they'll go out on ships to maintain the wind farm. Where they would normally share a property, they were told that they had to actually occupy properties individually, so they couldn't share. So that sort of helped us. So instead of maybe two guys sharing a 2-bed apartment, you had one guy in a 2-bed apartment and one guy in another one of our apartments. So that helped to offset. We reduced our prices slightly, so there was a bit of a hit there. So outside of that part of Kent, so around St Albans, Luton, Stevenage, we were concentrating more on, again, key workers, but concentrating on people who were working on infrastructure. So these would be people working on the road. So there's quite a bit of road work being done around the area at that time, and that continued. And also we had some builders in who were working on a school. So when we saw sort of COVID coming in, we knew the leisure market was absolutely going to disappear, and that's absolutely what's happened. So we concentrated on key workers and those bookings that we could satisfy. Interestingly, when the hotels closed, we contacted a lot of the local hotels and asked them to send any inquiries that they were getting for key workers to ourselves. And really pleasingly, despite the fact that they're competitors, we've been getting leads from hotels in the area, and that's been really successful. And that's been a really good part of the whole COVID crisis in terms of working with people that you wouldn't normally work with. So we wouldn't normally work in a positive way with our competitors. But that's been really, really satisfying and really good to do.
So if you had to assess the first 6 months of this year from a business point of view, how would you rate it? How would you reflect on it?
A challenge, definitely a challenge. So I've taken the opportunity to build another business, to start a completely new business, property related, that's concentrating on development and planning. The idea, my thinking is that during any crisis, that then you look to see where you can take advantage and where you can help yourself and help others. So the crisis gave us the time that I could start another business. We needed to concentrate on our fundamentals. So what we've done is we've been looking more at our processes, been looking more at things like our KPIs, our key performance indicators, how we can improve them and bring those more up to date and do them in a better, swifter fashion. So with everything, there is opportunity. Absolutely, if I had a chance, I would not have gone through this. I'd rather have, for revenue and also for our guest experience, have continued as we were. So for us, at Easter would normally be a really busy time, and we had no leisure bookings at all. So that, as I say, for Q2 hit our revenue by a third. What we're starting to see now is more leisure bookings. So the summer, we think will benefit because people won't be going abroad so much for their holidays. So people will be having more sort of staycations, more holidays in the UK. So we think we will benefit from that through the summer, assuming people can travel in the summer. What we're also seeing at the moment is, as there's been a relaxing of the lockdown restrictions, we've been getting leisure bookings and inquiries to stay in our properties.
You read a lot in the press about serviced accommodation operators who rushed to put their properties back onto long-term lets because of what was happening in the short-term sector. First of all, is that true in your experience? Have you seen that happening? And is that something that you've been tempted to do at any point during this?
Definitely people have moved from short-term accommodation to long-term accommodation. I know people that have done that. I've also known people who are doing rent-to-rent, move their properties back to the owners if they can. And it is also something that we considered And that we could still do that. So for me, it's about having options. So with the property, what we try to do is have a fairly diverse portfolio. So we've got HMOs, we've got single lets, we've got short-term lets. So we could pivot quite quickly into long-term letting if we wanted to. So we'll keep that as an option. Haven't needed to do it at the moment, but it's always an option, Rob, and I think it's always good to have that.
How has the sentiment been around other people operating in this market? So you adapted really quickly and you made a lot of changes, but how have other people adjusted?
People have adjusted by focusing on key workers, or some people have concentrated on NHS workers. Some people definitely moved to longer term lets. So that would say take them through to November, when people are thinking that the crisis will be over, in which case it will then return to short-term letting. And some people are, sort of sitting on properties that they're just waiting to come out. For businesses, for short-term accommodation businesses that were paying business rates and claiming small business rates relief, you can claim a grant from the government. So that has certainly helped us. That's a grant that we've applied for, and has also helped other people I know in the sector. So you've got some people who've been able to pivot and move to sort of key workers as much as possible. Some people have dropped their prices quite dramatically. I think there's a real danger there, but some people have definitely done that. Some people maybe aren't sticking to the rules as strictly as they should. It's quite a difficult time for the short-term accommodation market, but there are opportunities there. So, for instance, there's a guy whose house, he sold his house. He wanted to get it sold because the market was a little bit tricky, and his new property, which is a brand new property, hadn't been finished building because of the builders not being able to progress the build. So, in that instance, we had somebody in our accommodation for 4 weeks, in one of our properties for 4 weeks, because he was basically homeless. So he had nowhere to go. So, there are opportunities out there. And we managed to do that by networking with our existing contacts and also building new contacts. Another consequence of the crisis has been, so we have got links with insurance companies and relocation companies. So, for instance, if you unfortunately suffer a leak or some sort of catastrophe in your house and you can't live in it anymore, then we have links with insurance companies to temporarily house people. And we also do that for people being relocated. So quite often this can be people from overseas coming to the UK. We get sort of those bookings as well, which are very good bookings. One of the bookings we had was for a one-bedroom apartment in Luton, and that was a relocation booking for 120 days. Now, that 120 days was finishing sort of midway through the crisis. And because the person can then move on to their new accommodation, that then extended to 160 days. In fact, they've only just left and they've managed to move on. So there are opportunities, and it's not just all bad. There's also some positive things from a business perspective that can happen, despite the fact that how awful the virus has been and for individuals themselves.
Chris, you've talked a bit about how you see things panning out over the summer and what might happen there. But what if we go a bit further out than that? If you look out to, say, the next 3 years, how do you see things changing in the sector over that time? Is it going to continue to be tough? Do things get back to normal and there are more opportunities? Is this a market that anyone should be thinking about going into right now?
It's not something I think should be entered into at the moment. So it's quite a difficult time at the moment, unless people have got particular advantages in terms of contacts or bookings that they can take advantage of key workers and the other workers that I've already spoken about and the other opportunities. I think as a model and as a strategy, it's excellent. And also, I think service accommodation will be in a better position than, say, hotels will be when it comes to reopening. So it's much easier to social distance in a service accommodation because you and your family, or whoever you're with, occupy the entire space. In a hotel, that's not the case. There's lots of shared space in hotels. And I think that will prove more of a challenge to hotels. I think they can overcome it, It's not insurmountable, but it is more of a challenge. I think starting the service accommodation business as we're speaking in the middle of June, I wouldn't start one now. You might want to plan and build and be ready for when we're released. I think my own personal view is that property prices will soften for 2 to 3 years. I think it's going to take 2 to 3 years before we get to the position that we were at the start of 2020. For service accommodation, I still see strong demand. So we're still seeing strong demand from key workers. As I say, the leisure industry is nowhere at the moment and we can't even accept bookings. That will change and I think we'll come out of that stronger. So I think there'll be more demand because people won't be holidaying so much overseas. People will still need to want to get away with their family and friends. Also, I think what we've been seeing in recent years is people want their families to see more of the UK. So if you have a foreign holiday every year, what we're seeing is families also want their children to see what the UK has to offer as well. So rather than maybe having one holiday a year, people are having several holidays all through the year, and some of that is in the UK. So we're seeing that growing. So as a sector and as a property investment strategy, I still think service accommodation offers good opportunities for people. And the great thing is, of course, that it is something you could try. So you could try service accommodation for 6 months and see how you get on. Admittedly, it's more challenging from a standing start, but you've got to start somewhere. So you could try it for 6 months and then return the property to an AST if that wasn't to prove as you planned or expected. So it's quite flexible like that. And also in property, it's always good to have options. So you might find an area that you've currently got an AST in that if you do some research, you might see that there's strong service accommodation demand. It's easy to check what your competitors are charging and you could sort of do a business model on that. And if you can cover your costs at 50%, so 50% occupancy, you can more than cover all your costs, and that would include utilities, any lending or rent to rent if you do that, follow that model, then I think that's a good model to follow, and service accommodation has good opportunities. Obviously, you must keep legal. There's lots of conditions in terms of mortgage conditions that you need to think about. So you do need some specialist mortgage. It's likely you need a specialist mortgage product, and also permission if it's a leasehold, or maybe it's a leasehold property. You might need permission there. But I still think it's an excellent model, and that's been seen by the growth of the area. In actual fact, I think at some point legislation will be implemented and it's likely that service accommodation will need to be accredited. So I think in the future, all service accommodation properties will be accredited by Quality in Tourism or the AA or body like that. And that would be good in terms of raising standards. It would increase sort of the cost base, but would start to professionalise, I think, the industry more.
Do you have any advice or words for encouragement to other investors, whether they be new to this sector or seasoned, who are going to be listening?
I think service accommodation is a great strategy and it can be really rewarding. The feedback you get from guests on, say, Google or Booking.com, the ratings you get, we've enjoyed very good ratings, like 9.8, 9.7. I think it's really satisfying to get that really positive feedback and confidence that you're doing the right thing. There's no reason why other people can do exactly the same thing. I'm very lucky. Lisa, my wife, actually looks after this side of the business, and she does an excellent job doing that. It offers flexibility. You are in the service sector. It's really important to remember you are actually in the service sector. And so you need to respond to issues, quite swiftly, certainly more swiftly than you would maybe on an AST. And I think the opportunities will grow. I think people like the sort of Airbnb short-term model. Families like it. So where families would have previously had to stay in a hotel, maybe had two rooms, they can stay in a single property and almost move their home to a different location. But for all lots of reasons, for several years, as a model, this has been working really well. You just need to sort of do it properly, recognise the rules and regulations, check your market, understand your market, who your avatar is, who your typical guest is, and concentrate on that. There are lots of opportunities. So it's not just people on holidays. You've got contractors, you've got professional people, you've got people who can't live in their homes for whatever reason, and you've got people relocating. So there's all sorts of different aspects to the market. And if that's of interest to people, then it's a really good property strategy to adopt and to run.
Well, thank you so much, Chris, for sharing that knowledge. So good to hear firsthand what's been going on in the sector and get beyond the headlines we've been hearing about it. Rob, the thing that stood out to me most from that conversation was hearing about the impact that the pandemic's had on Chris's portfolio. I wasn't surprised that it's been negative. Obviously, we were expecting that. I was actually surprised by how small the fall was. He said that he'd seen a 30% drop, and obviously a 30% drop isn't good, but given everything that's going on, I really thought it'd be worse than that.
Yeah, I'd expected much worse, although it could have been much worse for Chris if he'd just been passive during this pandemic. But he really hasn't, as we heard. He's been very active, and it's actually really impressive. He's not just tweaked his strategy and kind of changed a few things around the edges to adapt to the situation. It's actually really impressive how adaptive he's been and the amount of changes he's put in place and the amount of work he's done to make sure that his investment strategy hasn't suffered. But he has put in a lot of work. And I think this is probably one of the first takeaways here, Rob. It's, serviced accommodation to a lot of people seems very attractive on the surface. And for some people, it will be. But they should not kid themselves. This requires work. And Chris has put in that work and he's seen the rewards for it. And work comes in many different forms. It can be putting the hours in one way or another, or using your brain and being creative to solve problems. And I think Chris has done a bit of both there.
Yeah, definitely. And we're seeing that to the extreme because this situation is so extreme. But I think the same goes for serviced accommodation at any time. It's a strategy that can be very profitable, but it does involve work. And as you say, that takes the form of actual physical work in that there's a lot more to do with marketing and changeovers and cleaning and repairs and things like that. But that thinking and that strategy and positioning, far more important to be active with that than with buy-to-let, where you can pretty much just leave properties for years on end. But clearly Chris has no problem with hard work, because I was also struck by how well he's made use of his time. Despite all this, he said he'd still had more time than usual during lockdown, and he used that time to look for opportunities. He'd mentioned that he was starting another business and he'd been reviewing his processes. I think that says a lot about how he runs his business and how you need to approach a business like this. Instead of taking his foot off the gas or sitting around feeling sorry for himself because he's seen a drop in business, he's actually using this time positively to create new opportunities. And I think that's such a valuable attitude to have.
It's interesting when people in property investment or business are tested, you really get to see what they're made of, and do they, crack, or do they adapt, and do they find new ways to improve? And Chris has definitely done that, and I think he should be commended for it. He probably is far too humble to do that for himself, but he really should be really happy and proud of what he's done and how he's reacted, and how calm he was. I appreciate he's had a few weeks to adapt to the new normal, but if he was all over the place, then he wouldn't have been able to think straight and put all these new ideas and systems and different approaches in place. Now, of course, if you're listening and you have at times been emotional up or down during the pandemic as an investor, business owner, or just an individual, that's absolutely fine. I'm pretty sure Chris has had his moments as well. We are all human. But it's how long it takes you to get back on track. But then looking at the situation and going, I don't necessarily just want to survive, but actually, can I use this time now to thrive? And he's definitely taken that approach. And we absolutely commend him for it. So thanks for sharing your journey over the last few years, and particularly the last few months. It's been incredibly interesting. And I'm sure, no doubt, we'll get Chris back on in the future as well to tell us a bit more about his portfolio, because some of the stuff he's doing is really interesting.
So we could definitely count Chris's response to the pandemic as a success story, but we could always fit in a bit more. We love hearing about the success that our listeners have been having. So if you've just bought a property, finished a refurb, moved a tenant in, however big or small your success, we love hearing about how you've taken action as a result of listening to the podcast. So you can let us know on social channels like Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. We are at Property Hub UK, or you can leave a review of the podcast in whatever app you listen to. And that's what Scoble has done. He or she says, absolute rubbish. Are any negative reviews of this podcast? The two Robs have joined me on my daily 75-minute commute each way between Dubai and Abu Dhabi for the past year. Since tuning in as an accidental landlord, this podcast has allowed me to make informed decisions, formulate my own property investment strategy, and invest in 2 additional properties in the UK. Although completing on both properties just before the coronavirus outbreak, I'm still 100% confident in my long-term strategy and goals. Well done, Skyble. That is absolutely brilliant. Investing when you're an expat does provide extra challenges. There's a lot more friction. It is just flat out more difficult. But despite all that, you've managed to make it work. So well done, and thank you for sharing that success story. If you happen to be an expat, and we do know we have a fair few of them listening, then go to propertyhub.net, type expat into the search box, and you'll find a selection of podcasts, articles, and videos that we've done on that subject in the past, which might just help you out and put you on a similar path to success.
So it's time to give you a bit extra, in fact, hub extra, that part of the show where we just give you a little bit more before you go. Think you've had enough? Well, no, we want to top up that value that little bit further for you. And this is backed up by the weekly email that goes out to all Property Hub members, which we aim to make the most valuable email you receive in your inbox every single week. A charge, you ask? Don't be silly. It's absolutely free. All you need to do is sign up on the Property Hub website and you'll receive that email. And of course, be able to access all our free courses as well, which will probably make it the best property deal you'll do in a long while. This week, bit of a nerdy one, but I'm a bit of a nerd. I'm going to recommend chess.com. So, the backstory to this is my son is quite good at chess. He plays at a decent level. And I've played him at home to keep him sharp, but I've never had any formal training, so I just play along with him. And I've noticed recently he's been getting pretty good. He's starting to beat me. So I thought, wait a minute, need to sharpen up here. Not that I'm competitive at all. So I downloaded chess.com, and I've really been able to up my game. There's paid versions of it, but I use the free version, and I'm able to take advantage of different training, different courses. There's articles on there as well, but the main thing for me is that I can play regular games and get through lots of games quickly, try different strategies, and I've really upped my game, which was really helping me playing my son. Unfortunately, though, he spotted that I've been playing this interesting chess app on my iPad, and he's downloaded it. And now he plays as well, and he's upped his game. So I now need something else to take it to the next level, but it did help me improve. So if you've got even a passing interest in chess, I'd highly recommend it. It's great fun. And if you haven't, but it's something that you might like to try and get into, well, they're really good at helping beginners improve, and they match you to players who are closer to your ability level. And there's lots and lots of people on there. You're never short of someone to play. So check it out. It's chess.com. Really easy. They've got a website. They've got apps. And for free, again, it's pretty good value.
So there you go. This week we've had dispatches from the front line of property. Thank you so much to Chris Ryder, and loads of great free resources for you to check out in property and beyond. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. We always love to hear what you think, so let us know. We're on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram at Property Hub UK. And as Rob mentioned earlier, there's loads of extra content over on our YouTube channel as well. We're Property Hub UK on there too. We will see you next with Ask Rob and Rob, as always, on Tuesday. Until then, enjoy the rest of your week and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.